Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Welcome back from the holidays, everyone. We hope that yours was good and merry and all that good stuff there. I think we had a good time, didn't we, Ben?
Yeah, I think so. I enjoyed it.
Did Ho-Ho find you?
Sure.
Sounds like you at least had fun, but potentially where some of the stuff came from maybe a difference of opinions.
So,
But in any case, I think it was a good holiday. We hope everybody out there in our listeners has had good holidays as well, whatever ones you happen to enjoy, or if you don't celebrate any of the holidays, just having a little time off with everybody else around. Whatever the case may be, we hope you all enjoyed it. So tonight, we are on episode, what did I say, 298, and we're going to be talking about tarps. And funny enough, Ben and I were talking about this just a few minutes ago. I can't believe we've gone almost 300 episodes, Ben, and not done a topic on tarps specifically, because as you said, we're around them a little bit.
yeah, well, and I know we've talked about them, so obviously it was in contact with something else, but yeah, it's hard to believe. We are around them quite a bit. It's a staple in my gear. I've always taken a tarp or two, depending on the trip. You know, there's a reason to have a few tarps, and they're a basic safety necessity, really. They can do so much, and so we'll get into all that. I'm questioning whether 30 minutes will cover it, or if we'll do a two-parter or what.
And if we have to, we can break it down for a two-parter. Absolutely not a problem. But yeah, I still, it's like, can't believe we haven't talked about this in depth, and I know we've talked about it in multiple episodes, much like you said. We just never actually took a topic to do it, and it is worth its own topic, honestly, because there's a lot to tarps. And I'm self-admittedly, Ben, you are a little more experienced with the tarps. I was a previous tent camper that became a hammock camper, so my dealings with tarps were pretty much ground sheets and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Not that I hadn't slept under a makeshift shelter, but I wasn't so concerned on tarp design so much as size and how easy it was to set up to a basic, you know, like pitch slope and stuff like that. Pretty basic stuff. But there's a lot to tarps, which is kind of what I just said. But what I mean by that is it's about materials. It's about the shape of it. It's about how big it is, how light it is, how well they pack up. I've seen tarps that, amazing tarps, super thick, block a snowstorm, but you also need to pull it on your sled. And then I've seen some really nice tarps, and actually I have one of your old ones. It packs down into a stuff sack, but extends out to this massive tarp that covers a huge area with lots of tie-outs. So I thought it would just be a good time to try and talk about some of that, because it is one of the things, back when I started, I struggled with what I wanted, and I ended up buying 5 or 6 different tarps before I found one that I truly liked. And towards the end of it, I was even bouncing the ideas off you, like, hey Ben, what do you think about this tarp? You know what I mean? And I remember those conversations from way back.
yeah, I mean, the first ever YouTube video I ever posted, I think before even me and you were talking, I created one, and it was on tarps. It was the comparison of a couple of tarps, because I was testing different equipment, and what it came from is I wanted a hammock, and I didn't want to spend the money on a full kit, so I started getting different hammocks, and then when I did get my first hammock, I was comparing it to the Sil Nylon, I think the one that you inherited, and an awesome tarp, with only one minor issue we may talk about later. But, you know, those are the things. But before we get too far, let's start off, in case anyone's new to this and saying, well, what really do you mean by a tarp? And a tarp is quite literally, very basic, any piece of material that is water resistant that can be used to protect you against the elements. And that is basically it.
And I guess just to add on to that, the two common methods of using a tarp is, as Ben said, either as shelter or under you as sometimes labeled as a ground sheet, though there is difference between a real ground sheet and a tarp.
Yeah. So a good tarp can be used as a ground sheet. It is harder on it. But in the end, when it's used as a ground sheet, it's to help protect you against the moisture and the dirt on the ground. So you put a tent over a ground sheet, it protects the tent, it'll last longer. and it helps keep you drier inside. You put a tarp over your tent, help keep your tent dry in case maybe it leaks, or give you that extra protection against wind and stuff. So your tarp is a protection. It's something you can use. You can wrap items with your tarp. If you think about firewood, a lot of people cover their firewood in a tarp. You can cover yourself. You can just wrap yourself in a tarp, and you have an instant shelter in a very micro format. If you string it between a couple of trees, it'll look a bit like a tent, but not have all the functionality of a tent. It's so much more simple. It's very flexible. Um, and yeah, it just needs to keep the elements in. So other than basically a piece of straight cotton, which would leak through instantly and give you virtually no protection, any piece of anything that's a sheet that you can stretch out and is water resistant can be used. And the very most rudimentary one I can think of is a shower curtain. I know people who buy a shower curtain, throw it in their bag, and it's a one-person tarp that will keep them out of the weather in a bad condition.
Yep, and much likewise me, other than a shower curtain, dollar store tarp. You know what I mean? $4, 8x4. It's basically the same as a shower curtain, in all honesty, because dimensions of a shower curtain very similar to that, very same, and pretty close in cost. You can get both from the dollar store.
Yeah, and yeah, so the standard blue. I know you can also get them in orange and gray.
I was going to say gray and green seems to be what's going here at the moment.
Yeah, but these standard tarps, the ones you can buy at the dollar store, Canadian Tire, Walmart, in the construction area, really, those are the most basic tarp that you can get. It already has grommet holes in it, so it's really easy to string up. You can strap it to things, and they're used, traditionally in the back of a truck to keep things dry or keep your firewood safe. But it works great as a shelter. And if somebody says, "Oh, I can't afford a shelter, I can't afford to go camping," that is the bare bones solution. Go buy one of those; it'll work great. What it will suffer for is repackability. Those tarps are much, much harder to repack than a more high quality one, and they generally don't last that long. They will break down in the sunlight. They will break down in heavy winds. They'll slowly take apart. But you will get many, many nights before they fail.
Absolutely. I mean, my first tarp, for what it was worth, and there's pictures off it floating around from the first Nova Scotia Bushcraft gathering. My first tarp was a dollar store tarp, along with my first hammock and a bunch of other stuff. I learned a lot from that trip, but it was a good place to test all this stuff. That was the first time I actually went out and tried to camp with a hammock, for lack of better words. Like, I camped in the backyard and slept in a hammock and stuff like that, but never really saying, "Yep, this is my sleep shelter, my sleep system shelter, and I'm going. I'm going to try and make this work." And it did work. All honesty, it did work. There was some drawbacks, but there were some benefits too. The big benefit was it was dirt cheap. Literally grabbed it from the dollar store. I was on my way there, so I was like, I'll buy a tarp in the dollar store. I know it's there, and it worked. Some of the downsides were it didn't breathe, which is much things that are waterproof. And a lot of those plastic tarps or poly tarps, they're going to be like literally plastic. They don't breathe. They don't let anything through. They're a little stiff, a little rigid, made a little bit of noise in the night. Didn't really bother me, but I could see it could bother other people.
Yeah, no, for sure. A very common one, just coming up with materials. So, like I said, a flat sheet of poly plastic, just clear plastic, works great. Shower curtains, the woven poly tarps are great. Tyvek sheets. A lot of people for quite a while were buying Tyvek sheets. Some are throwing them in the dryer with some tennis balls, bang them around because the air is loud. It's like tin. If you've ever moved tin,
Yep,
it has that wobble wobble noise. It is really bad, but super good, lightweight, very strong, very rigid, very waterproof. So Tyvek or Tyvek derivatives. There's copies of them, various companies. But yeah, if you happen to be walking by a construction site, there's a good chance there's a sheet of that blowing around somewhere, or you're getting a scrap because you only really want, like you said, 4x8, 8x6, 12x6, 12x8. These are all very common tarp sizes.
And bigger is not necessarily better, depending on your tarps. I guess that's the first little bit of wisdom I'm going to throw out there from my experience in getting tarps. Bigger is not always better.
No, and we should definitely get into that. But yeah, I think one of the things people are going to ask us, and we'll hit this first, is what should I be looking for in a tarp? And size is in there, size for sure. First off, what fits your budget? Don't spend more money on a tarp than you can afford. Same with any gear. But it needs to be something that's waterproof. Ideally, it has tie downs, a location that you can strap it to something. The more tie downs, the more functional it's going to be. Also, generally, the more weight and function. But with Tyvek, there's Tyvek tape. You can create your own. You double it up, put a grommet on it. It's easy to do. You can stick a rock in it and just tie a string around the rock and make almost any piece of material work.
And that's something I was going to mention, was if you are working with a sheet of plastic or something like that, and I'm cool with a sheet of plastic. Some of the best times I've had camping out in the woods was literally vapor barrier. I stole some from the old man when he was redoing one of our houses once. He never did let me forget that. But anyway, it was really cool. We made kind of a low-lying shelter. I wasn't in a hammock. We just did the old picture like a lean-to with a little bit of lean out. So it'd be like a small front, then your backdrop, and then it kind of comes under you, but it stays under the other point. Hard to explain. I could draw it better. But anyway, it worked great, and it's amazing to sleep in if there's any kind of rain. Because one, you get that, like I love sleeping in a tent or a tarp and listening to the rain go to sleep. But then you also got like that panoramic window. You can still kind of look out. You're perfectly dry. You get to see all that. I thought it was a real cool experience. It really made me look to see if I could get translucent tarps. Problem is, most translucent materials don't hold up super great. At a good price point anyway, you know what I mean? So you're going to get into a lot of like woven fibers, obviously. They're going to be more durable, they're going to hold up, have a lot more longevity, but you can't see through them. But if you ever have a chance, get yourself like one of those. It was a roll of plastic and then you unfolded it and got 12 feet wide, and as long as you pulled the roll out, knock yourself off a chunk of that, have a treat, wait until it's warm, and go have a little nap in the woods when it's raining. It's fun.
Dollar stores and most hardware stores will also sell you these clamps meant for tarps.
Yes.
And basically, it's a fairly flat area, so it spreads out the force, and it's just a wedge design. So as you tighten it up, it bites down harder and harder, and then you can pull from the other end. So there's plenty of ways to make any waterproof surface object or fabric into your shelter. So yeah, you need it to be waterproof, ideally durable enough to survive what you're putting it through. So super thin plastics will probably break under heavy rains and winds, but as long as it has some structural rigidity, waterproofness, and you can stretch it between two spots, you're on a good start towards getting a really good tarp. And like I said, more tie-outs, the more options you have. I really do enjoy a few extra tie-outs, probably a few in the middle, maybe some in the quadrants, so you can do pull-outs. But definitely all the way around the edge. And then you've got that. Now, next, I guess, material. We did say you can do it from almost anything. If you're going to get into more high-end stuff, surprisingly, on one end you have like the $2-3 option, and then the other end you have the $300 and $400 options, and a lot of them are around the $80. Like $80 to $150 is about the sweet spot for a lot of tarps, believe it or not. And this is where you're going to get into your polyurethane, your sil nylons, and even your carbon fiber. I think your Cuban fiber was the name of one. There's Kevlar ones. There's all kinds of expensive tarps you can get. And they come with really nice tie-outs. They come with, designed for the lengths of, say, hammocks, because hammocks range anywhere between 10 and 12 feet. And you can get them with the ability to link them together, especially if the tie-outs are really good. You can sort of close the end, kind of make them very much like a tent. And they have some different shapes. Cat cut, I think they call it, where they have like a curve cut between the grommets.
Yep. And I'm kind of a fan of that for certain applications.
It spreads the force out nicer. It does make a really nice tarp. I have a couple with it. I really do enjoy it. Um, but yeah, so understand that. You said size isn't bigger isn't always better. I do love a big tarp. I gotta say.
I mean, there is something about a good sized tarp, but it has to be manageable. Don't get something that's going to be too much for you to carry and repack is the big one. Bigger tarps are sometimes difficult to repack, especially if they're going to be damp or something like that. May take an extra set of hands. Just before we move on, I just wanted to let everybody know out there, I'm getting a weird error on YouTube side, so if somebody can let me know if everything is good on your side, that'd be very much appreciated. I know we got our RM shoots in the comments there, so if you're listening to us there, can you just give us a heads up if everything's coming through okay? It's something about a keyframe frequency. I assume that's something with the software I'm using, OBS. Maybe it's set too high. Hopefully it's fine for tonight.
I did get a notice twice on mine that the internet connection was poor.
I have no drop frames, and I'm still holding at about 43,000 kilobits. So, or 4 megabits, whichever way you want to look at it. Anyway, should be okay.
Anyways, yeah. So, size. We were talking about size. Yes, you do need it to be large enough to cover what you need to cover. So, if you're sleeping in a hammock, it should cover foot to tail. And side to side enough that if it rains, it's not going to get over you. My original hammock came with a diamond shape, which I would say is a minimalist solution to a tarp. I generally use a rectangular shape one, and those extra corners, the material that would be missing out of my diamond shape, I pull those down and create walls with mine. And that means when the wind is at a perpendicular direction and you would like, that it tends to prevent it from getting to me and keeps me a bit drier, a bit safer from the wind, and I do find it a bit warmer without the wind howling through on me.
Now, just because we're on the topic, I like a hexagonal shape.
Yeah,
I do. And this is something else, folks. We'll talk about shape later on. This is definitely going to be a two-parter. We're coming up on 20 minutes already. Anyway, shape does play a fact in some of the stuff that you're going to do too, and people will have preferences on it. But more to come on that later. Maybe tomorrow. Or not tomorrow, next week.
Yeah, well, I mean, you get setting up and how to keep things taut and how to don't get them flapping around. The shape does matter. The way the stick works, how it seals, if it's made from a couple of panels. All these things are huge factors. But the beauty, let's get back to the beauty. The beauty is once you find a tarp that reaches what you want, you end up with almost unlimited customizability of how you're going to set up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. Starting off, think inside the box. Go look what some other people have done. Don't repeat the wheel until you get used to it a little bit. Not saying not be adventurous, but learn the basics, if that makes any kind of sense. That's what I tried to jump too far too fast. Learn the basics, some basic setups, like, the typical triangle pitch and then a low wedge pitch. And once you learn the basics, then start getting creative. There's a lot of things you can do with a tarp once you start thinking outside the box. And I mean, when you and I and Steve were all down at the lake camp in that time, we took one of your tarps and we were kind of playing with some of the setups and things like that. And that's fun to do. And it's a good learning activity, especially if there's multiple people, because one, extra hands make a lot of light work. And when you're dealing with larger tarps, sometimes the extra hands make things nice. You're not going to drag in the mud, blah, 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 blah. But then also everybody gets a little bit of the information and the input. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we will never cover every way you can set up a tarp. I don't think on this show. It's not our goal. It's not our thing. But like as you get to a place and you look at how the land sits and how the objects you can attach to and what objects you have that you might be able to use to help prop it up. So, hiking sticks, a lot of people make really cool ones using hiking sticks or just existing sticks on the ground. The things you want to do is obviously protect it. So if you're going to stick a stick or something in it, I've often taken a tennis ball and stuck over the top of a stick or whatever. If you're using hiking sticks, like um, commercially available ones, the handle usually has a pretty smooth top, and that spreads the load. You're not just going to puncture your
Hmm. Puncture the
tarp with
tarp and
that.
cause yourself more problems. Because
Yeah,
that is also a problem. And why I say to learn the basics first. You'll learn a lot about what to do and what not to do by learning the basics. And one of the things I did was I put way too much stress on one point, putting a pole up, went to sleep, and it was great. Woke up with the tarp real close to me and the pole sticking through it. You know what I mean? So these are things that's better to learn better from someone else. Okay to learn by yourself in a learning experience.
yeah, and really understand the material your tarp is built of. Like a nylon tarp stretches, and people have no idea how much they stretch until they wake up the next morning and the tarp is now like half over them. You know,
And yeah, there is a lot of materials. Like we've only talked about a couple here tonight. Like you can get natural materials and synthetic materials. We talked about poly tarps, which is basically plastic. You can get nylon tarps, which Ben said. There's also what sil nylon, I think is what
yeah,
it's called. Sil
yeah, and that's
nylon,
why
which is another synthetic material. What's the benefit of sil nylon while we're talking about types here?
steel nylon, when it came out, was one of the lightest, most waterproof materials you could get. So, PU is the other one, polyurethane, polyester, and then nylon. The polyurethane is generally a stronger tarp and has a little less stretch, but it's heavier and it's more awkward to use. The steel nylon packed up really tight. Now, since then, there's been some more exotic materials come out, and that's where you get to spend a lot of money, but you can get materials that are super light and packed down next to nothing. Um, and that same material is used into tents and stuff, but you have to kind of realize that each of these materials also have benefits and disadvantages. Like I want to say it was Cuban fiber. It was a really popular one for a while. Now I don't even see anything on it. But it had to be taped. You couldn't sew it per se.
Mm. And I mean, one
Um,
of my favorite materials, which you can make at home, iron cloth, which is just cotton cloth saturated in a certain blend of stuff. Amazing tarp, super strong, fire resistant, heavy, and hard to work with.
yeah, and if you're looking for a traditional setup, it is hard to beat a really solid canvas or cotton tarp um, soaked with, basically linseed oil and wax, and it makes this awesome waterproof. It has a very nice patina to it almost.
Oh, amazing tarp, but there are drawbacks. Like I said, now when I made mine, and I think we talked about this in the past, and if anybody's interested in doing this, do research. Don't take what we're about to tell you here tonight and run out and make some, because there's a lot more to it and things you need to know. But basically, I used a 50-50 of, I think it was mineral spirits and boiled linseed oil, and a handful of iron powder. The iron powder just kind of worked as a binder and got in all the little nooks and stuff and just made it a more solid waterproof and I think a little more fire resistant, though I have seen lots of people do it without the iron, still perfectly fine. You know what I mean? And it just happened to be I had some. I had tons of iron powder from another project I was doing before, and I threw it in. Made a nice red hue to the cotton, and I found the sheets at Value Village, a thrift shop, whatever. It was Egyptian cotton was what I looked for because it had like a super high thread count. If you are going to make your own tarps, the higher the thread count, the better off you're going to be because it's going to be a little bit more durable and a lot more waterproof. Now that being said, a lot of things to keep in mind if you're doing this at home. Boiled linseed oil is organic. You're not going to do this, ball it up and throw it in the closet. There's going to be some, self decomposition, some spontaneous heating. Like I said, do research. Fun project, do the research.
The thing I liked about it, the few I've played with, is I never worried about using it as a ground cloth. Like you can literally throw this stuff on, walk on it, and not worry about it. With your more synthetic ones, you can easily poke a hole in it. And if you're using it around fire, an ember can leave a pretty drastic hole in your tarp. Where this, you might discolor it a bit, but you ain't burning a hole through it. Shy of taking a torch or
I was going to say, I held a lighter on my iron cloth for like 10 seconds, and I think all it did was like char it a tiny bit. Didn't burn or nothing, but I mean, when are you going to have direct flame contact for 10 seconds? unless you roll into the fire, in which case you got more problems. But anyway, other story, like you said. A lot of the synthetic materials, they really caught on in the later years simply because they were lighter. Originally, they're very expensive. Still, your synthetics are going to be generally a little bit more expensive. You're going to pay some decent money for a good quality tarp. But it is one of those things, I think it's worth the money, honestly. Coming from a guy that's bought everything from low-end tarps to, I'm not going to say high-end. The highest end tarp I have is probably the one you gave me. But, to moderate tarps, you know what I mean? I do have a couple nice tarps and I really like them. And honestly, it is worth sinking a little money into it. Do the research. Hopefully you can play with somebody else's tarps. And definitely, if you have the availability, try a couple different styles of tarps and see what you like. And then start investing your money based on your preferences. The first one you buy, I'm going to tell you right away, you're going to love, but you're going to find things that you want after you've used it for a little while. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm in that I know what I want for a tarp. Now it's time to do research, find the one that, one, has the dimensions I want. Two, has the, when I say design, I mean shape that I want. Three, is made out of the material I want. And four, has the amount of tie-outs I want. And that's the important one, which I'm kind of alluding here to, is the tie-outs. My opinion, never have enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I love them. I also like more or less evenly spaced tie-outs. And that was the kicker with that mech one. That mech one...
It's an asymmetrical, isn't it?
Yes. And I bought it. I got home, I set it up. I was like, I hate this. So I went back and said, maybe it was a mistake, or like the person that sewed it was drunk or something. And I pulled another one out in the store, and it was worse. Like I took the measurements. There's still a PDF file where I had all the measurements in. Tried to figure out how to use it. And the mech came back and said, well, it's done that way to make it easier to set up in different configurations. And I'm like, well, that's great, but could you share them? Because I can't figure out why I would like certain things. Because like I have one on the corner, and then probably like 6-7 inches up there's one, and then the next one's like 3 feet, and then like 4 feet, and then 3 feet or something. And then in the corner again, it's like, what a weird spacing.
And after you've worked with it for a while, it's probably great. But I'm with you, symmetrical, and when we're talking asymmetrical versus symmetrical, this is what we're talking about. The asymmetrical, it's either going to be oddly shaped, it's not symmetrical, you can't fold it in half and have a mirror image, or the tie-outs are going to be all over the place. Like they're not symmetrical, they're spaced out differently. And once you get onto them, I've heard lots of people have great experience with them. Much like Ben, I like them evenly spaced. I can think in even dimensions easier than I can with complicated, weird geometric shapes.
Yeah, I mean, it's me too. And when I go in the woods, like I have a bunch of tarps, and I take them in, and I do play with how I tie them out. Sometimes I want kind of doors, so I stretched them up across my ridge line. I think that's a really important thing for people to use as a ridge line. If you don't know what a ridge line is, it is a single line that your tarp either hangs from or hangs over. But it's one that goes from 2 points and your tarp is in between it. If you want to understand how to hang it underneath, there's plenty of methods. I highly recommend prusset knots and adjusting, and you can really have some freedom there. And maybe that's a part for the next episode, because we are at
Yep. And that's what I was just putting on our information there, was part one. So a couple things before we end off. Yes, RM, I did see the comment you said over there, and he said, I wanted to mention a piece of kit that has two purposes. Some military issue ponchos can double as tarps. Dutch PDM pattern poncho, and I have some Polish Lavados. I think that's how you say it. I'm not 100% sure. I'm terrible with words. But in any case, maybe I'll drag one of those in for part two or do a quick video on them. But once again, there's tons of videos on the internet floating around about there, and I'm not here to repeat the wheel. Here to give you guys some good information. So next week, we are going to have to pick this up then. I don't want this to run too long, as I'm short. Oh gosh, I got rid of Ben somehow. What am I doing here? There we go. No, I clicked the window and it closed you over here, which made you cut out of the video for a second. But we got your beautiful face back. Anyway, next week, why don't we... Let me back up a little. This week, we talked a lot about definitions of what a tarp is, materials, shapes, and a lot of terminology. Next week, why don't we look at how to select a tarp? So for somebody that's out there looking to buy, this was a great episode today to get all your terminology in there and hear some stuff. Next week, let's talk about how to actually select a tarp for somebody that's coming into it. And I'm going to be honest, I'm going to rely pretty heavily on you, Ben, because you helped me walk through a lot of my stuff. And frankly, all I'm going to be doing is regurgitating the information you gave me at the time. So I don't mind talking, but you're probably going to correct me anyway.
So we're going to talk about how to set it up, how to use guidelines, how to use different types of knots to get the most out of it. I like to have mine set up so they're pretty well deploy and go really quickly, so that there's tricks to helping this. How do you pack it away so that it lasts the absolute longest? And that is a secret, and I will teach you that. But these are the type of things we are going to cover next week. So if you're listening and you enjoyed this at all, come back next week. I can assure you there will be more good information. But in the meantime, I do want to sort of echo one thing Robert said, is spending a couple of extra dollars on your tarp is oftentimes very worth it. I do absolutely love some of my tarps, and I would never trade them in on a poly woven tarp now, having had them. That being said, I've used them. I did love them when I had them, but man, the niceness, the quality, the enjoyment I get out of a quality tarp is there. Do you have to spend ridiculous amounts of money? Absolutely not. There's some beautiful deals out there. And we can show you what to look for. We can't guarantee you always get the best one, but know what to look for to get good.
And I mean, I've picked up some mid-range nice tarps for under $50. You know what I mean? Yeah. Under $50, in my experience, don't expect to get much. Unless you're shopping at the dollar store or something like that. Like, you can still get a good tarp for $50. But not in that mid-range level where you're getting into synthetics and stuff like that. And Ben was the first one that told me when I started looking for tarps, after he seen my poly tarp from the first Bushcraft gathering, was, you know what, Rob? Spending a few extra dollars on your tarp's probably going to make you a lot happier than you think. And it stuck with me. And the man actually told me this at the Bushcraft gathering as he was walking by. And this is before we started this whole podcast. We were just passing acquaintances then. And that was the first thing he told me. And I was just kind of like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. And went on about my business. Wisest words somebody's ever told me about a tarp.
What a wise ass.
Oh yeah, it's kind of like, I'm not going to lie. At the time, I'm like, you know what? I don't know how to take that. Somebody walking by and telling me to spend a few dollars on a tarp. I thought I was doing pretty good. But now I understand what you mean. You did not mean it as a negative comment. You were legitimately telling me useful information. Hey, man, you invest a little into that tarp's going to treat you way better and you're going to be way happier.
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't trying to be a wise ass, but I can see how it may have come off that way.
Hey, I didn't let it bother me, but I learned a valuable lesson. One, listen to strangers, and two, spend a little money on your tarp. And you don't have to go nuts, like you said, Ben. It doesn't mean spend $300-400 on a tarp. It means do your research, spend the appropriate money for what you want. You can spend $300-400 on a tarp, get some amazing tarps, or you can spend like $30 to $50 and still get a good tarp that's going to do a lot what you want it to. Yeah, I'll try and bring that poncho in next week. It's sitting out in the garage. I have it put away. Actually, I kind of want to set the thing up anyway in the snow, so that might be fun.
I picked up a cheap poncho from, it was nylon poncho from Amazon for my trip to Algonquin last year. And that had the grommets on the corners. I could easily make it as a small tarp, and it would easily give me a shelter for a night or two. A great survival thing. Yeah. And this is the last thing I'm going to say. As one tarp is not always all you need, I often take a couple. One for my personal shelter, and then another one for the group, or for emergencies and other things, or for just gear. But it does come in handy, especially in climate weather. You never know when you'll have to deploy something pretty quickly to protect yourself and all your gear. And having a tarp on the ready is invaluable. So yeah, that's about all I had for tonight.
Yep, that's about all I have. So just to sum up the guys that are here in the comments, I want to give a shout out to everybody because we always try to. Thanks for joining us here. RM Shoots, of course. We had Jacob DeFord and our good old friend Red Bear just joined in here at the last second too and said that he loves his DD Hammocks tarp. Easy to configure into a good shelter. And we're going to talk more about that next week. So if you're just joining us in here, be sure to come back next week and weigh in on that, because I know you'd be another voice that would have some definite good thoughts or information that can be passed along readily to a lot of, hopefully, eagerly waiting ears to learn more than what they knew previous to hearing it. Trying to think of the most politically correct way to say that. It's the world we live in, and it's getting more difficult.
And hopefully, if my wife listens, she can understand why I have a large Rubbermaid container full of tarps that have cost us a small fortune.
I think anybody that listens to our show, Ben, would probably back you up and give you a plethora of reasons to give her, which I'm sure she's probably heard. Trust me, I've been on this side listening to you give her the reasons, while I've been on this side talking to my significant other having the same conversation.
Why do you need so much gear?
Why not? What else am I going to spend my money on when I die? They don't like that comment. But anyway, we digress. So next week, join us. Again, we're going to continue on our tarps topic. Much like Ben said, it's going to be more towards what to look for, how to set up, how to maintain, and how to put away. So if that's what you're looking for, we'll see you next week. Hopefully you'll love the stuff here this week. All right, folks, that's it for me. Have a good night. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye all.